everyone, Ben Woodruff here with another Falconry video. Today's video I'm going to be talking about jackrabbits. Many of you have asked that I do some videos spotlighting prey species. So we're going to talk about jackrabbits as an animal, a little bit about their history, how to hunt them, how to find them, and what to do when you actually catch one. Now today I'm going to have Max with me. This is a recently acquired rescue macaw. He's a hybrid between a scarlet macaw and a military macaw, but his former home, he did not get the love and attention he needed, and so he plucked a lot of the feathers from his chest. So he's with me, keeping social, keeping happy, and staying with me almost all the time, including while I'm recording a video. So that's why he's here right now. So thank you for letting him be here with us today. Now before we dive into jackrabbits, I need to make sure to make it clear, if you're in the old world, and if you're in an old world country, the term jackrabbit, especially when you see this animal, might seem confusing. In America, we use the term rabbit incorrectly to mean any lagomorph, basically. Any member of that family, we're like, it's a rabbit. And a jackrabbit, we're like, oh, it's a big rabbit. Well, I understand that in other countries, these large, gangly, large-eared, stretched-out lagomorphs are called a hare. I understand that. But I use the term jackrabbit because that's what we use here. It's inaccurate, but Americans are kind of interesting that way. So, jackrabbits are most comparable to the blue hare of the old world. And just like them, jackrabbits and hares both have large ears. They both have long, gangly legs, and they're much more sizable than, say, a cottontail rabbit. Now, if you are new to falconry, you may or may not have understood that all rabbit species are typically hunted. Rabbits are a very worthy quarry and something that provides a lot of meat and a lot of sport and a lot of exercise for your bird. And it's a species that's regularly hunted by wild raptors as well. If you haven't looked into falconry much, when you hear the term jackrabbit, you might be picturing something fluffy and cute, just like similar to a cottontail, but domestic rabbits. We see domestic rabbits, and they're these cute little fuzzy things that have been selectively bred for pets or for the meat industry or for the fur industry. So they're just these cute little fluffy things. It's very far from what their wild ancestors were like. Even cottontails are much closer to these domestic rabbits, kind of cutesy and fluffy. Jackrabbits are very much their own creature. They're like lagomorphic greyhounds. They're long, they're wiry, they're strange, they have oversized ears, oversized eyes. They just have been shaped by so many forces into this true, strange, remarkable survival lagomorph. In the United States, there's normally 3 species of jackrabbits recognized. The antelope jackrabbit, which is the wiriest and the smallest, most adapted for the desert. The black-tailed jackrabbit, which is what I mostly have in my area and typically hunt. And then the white-tailed jackrabbit, which is the biggest of the 3 and is the only one of the 3 that turns white in the winter. So usually they're either higher in elevation or further north, and arguably are closely related to the snowshoe hare. But our 3 official jackrabbit species, antelope jackrabbit, black-tailed jackrabbit, white-tailed jackrabbit, and again, of those 3, it's the black-tail that's normally hunted in most areas. Now, they have an interesting history with humanity. In the United States, many Native American tribes hunted them and would not normally do it with bows and arrows, but most tribes would use snares or nets, and they would weave nets out of plants like dogbane and would kind of round them up at certain times. And their meat was used, of course, but the hide was made into these lush, wonderful robes and blankets. And it wasn't just fur sewn together. They would cordage some rope, take a tanned piece of jackrabbit hide, cut it into long strips, and wrap it around the rope, and then sew those furry ropes together and make it that way. So it made it much more insulated. So there is a definite history in the United States of Native peoples hunting these rabbits, and it's well documented. When pioneers and settlers began building farms in the American West and they were encountering jackrabbits, they were unprepared for the fact that this is a cyclical, species, which means out of the blue it'll just have a huge population explosion, especially on a year when, I've made a farm and planted all these crops, and now gajillions of jackrabbits everywhere, and they descend and they're eating your crops, eating your livelihood. It was the mindset. And it's actually kind of sad in my mind because people just killed them in mass. I understand why. It's interesting looking back at the old photos, and you see such as this one where they did a roundup, they corral them, and then people just beat them with, just like with baseball bats, with clubs. Just killed them in mass. That's the entire picture that you're seeing, all those dead rabbits on the ground and hanging in the background. I mean, that's what was done. And because of that mindset of people thinking, hey, I'm trying to save my livelihood, jackrabbits are trash animals that are eating my livelihood, that attitude has perpetuated to our time and has permeated the minds and philosophies of many hunters, which is unfortunate. Now, I'm not referring to falconers. I'm referring to gun hunters. Now, I am a gun hunter. I hunt with guns. I hunt with bows and arrows. I hunt with muzzle-loader, black powder mountain man guns, and with birds of prey. And what I found, most hunters of all those types are usually quite respectful of life, and they understand by hunting they are entering back into that whole circle of life and death. And so most experienced hunters have a really innate understanding of life. But jackrabbits are one of those ones where they don't. I can't tell you how many hunters that I respect will surprise me where we'll be just like, hey, let's just go shoot a bunch of bunnies. We're just going to go kill rabbits. Boom, boom, boom. And the attitude is just, let's kill them for fun. And no intention of eating the meat and no intention of using the hide. And the justification usually given is like, well, they're really bad for the farms. They eat all the crops. And I look around, I'm like, but we're in a valley 50 miles by 70 miles that doesn't have a single house or farm. Why are we just killing something to kill and leave it there? Now, I know that sounds a little preachy. I don't mean it to. I'm just trying to bring up the principle that this is a mindset that made sense, a few generations back, and now to me seems a bit antiquated to just be like, let's kill a bunch of rabbits, living animals that are living targets. So, and what's really sad about that as well is that this mindset, most people who shoot are usually using a shotgun. They kill them and they just leave them because they're not going to eat them. So why take them home? So they just leave them and they're like, let the coyotes and the predators eat them. Well, the problem with that is that dead rabbit is filled with lead. And the problem with that is sharp-eyed eagles, condors flying overhead say, hey, there's a fresh dead rabbit that I didn't have to go to the effort of catching myself. After those people leave, I'm going to dive down and eat it. And they get lead poisoning. So if you have any value for our raptors, then I always tell people, please, even if you do hunt jackrabbits with guns and don't intend to eat them, bury them. Please at least dig a little hole and bury them and let the nutrition at least go into the plants rather than leaving it out and causing lead poisoning for the predators, such as golden eagles, bald eagles, and condors that will eat that rabbit. So, again, I don't mean that to sound really preachy. I just think it's a good principle to understand. Now, what has shaped jackrabbits today? When you go out and you see a jackrabbit, what has made them into what they really are? Jackrabbits are adaptable, and throughout the American West and Canada, they have diversified wherever they go, kind of subtropical areas in the coast of California, and you get them down into Mexico, Sonoran Desert, Mojave Desert, Great Basin Desert. I get it. Everywhere you go, they're going to be a little different. But it would be safe to say that sagebrush country is really the heartland of jackrabbit country. Sagebrush is really kind of their land. This is insanely ironic because sagebrush is terrible for them as far as a food source. Jackrabbits do eat some sagebrush, but not very much. Sagebrush does have nutrition available to them. However, sagebrush is a living organism trying to defend itself, and it has within it a chemical compound. It's not incredibly strong, but it's strong enough to make a difference, that kills gastrointestinal bacteria. Now, we are omnivores as humans. We process our food. We cook it. We cut it up. It's very easy for us to extract nutrition from our food. We have a better digestive system than a rabbit, and we can eat that range of food that's been cooked. Rabbits are eating crap. Rabbits are eating these grasses, and if you've ever seen rabbit poop, it just looks like grass. It looks like they didn't even digest it because their body hardly did digest anything. If they eat too much sagebrush, that chemical compound kills the gastrointestinal bacteria that breaks down their food for them beyond what their intestines can do. And what happens is when that happens, a jackrabbit will starve to death no matter how much it eats. If you've had a jackrabbit nothing but sagebrush for 2 days, and then the third day went back to giving it normal food, it'll be dead within a day. Because it's eating, but it's starving. It's not pulling any nutrition out. So they live in sagebrush country. That's their homeland. And yet that very plant is the plant that can cause them so much damage if they eat too much of it. But sagebrush is still good. It's a very dense plant all the way down to the bottom. And so it's a great place to hide. It's a great place for predators to hide too, but it is a great place to hide. But jackrabbits are grazers. They will browse a little on a few plants, but mostly they are grazers, which means they're eating grasses and small shrubs. Now, they traditionally share their landscape with other grazers. The pronghorn antelope of North America is, of course, one of the most prolific grazers that has still stayed on quite well throughout their range, despite mass killings in the 1800s. The bighorn sheep are largely being reintroduced. We think of them so much in the mountains, but in the 1800s, all the way back to the Ice Age, this is another grassland and prairie and high desert grazer that's shared with them, and now they're being bred and reintroduced to former habitat. And, of course, the American bison. Sometimes it's called a buffalo, but it's not a true buffalo. It's a bison. The American bison is actually very important traditionally to shaping the land. Bison eat the long grasses. Bison are willing to tackle long, tall bunch grasses that are much less nutritious. And when they eat these, and then when they're pawing at the ground, fighting, rolling around on the ground, that breaks up the soil and allows nitrogen to access roots and make more fertile settings, as well as their droppings, as their buffalo chips, as we like to call them. And all of that together makes a more true nutritious landscape and turns high deserts into more of a prairie desert. Jackrabbits prefer much more nutritious short grasses. Now, they'll eat the crap. They'll eat the long bunch grasses. They'll eat sagebrush. They'll eat whatever it's available that they have to survive. But they thrive in areas where you have these tiny seasonal grasses and shrubs that will appear here and there and all over. That's what they want to eat, and that's what they thrive and survive best on and can have the largest litters when they do so. Now, jackrabbits, of course, are a prey species. And who wants to eat them? Everything. Everything seriously wants to eat jackrabbits, it seems. And because of this, they're armed with attributes and traits and physical features to keep them alive. Now, the first one is their eyeballs. Now, all rabbits, of course, have eyes on the side of their head. Allows them to kind of look forward and backward and up and down all at the same time so that you see, predators around. Jackrabbits have, for their size, much larger eyes, and they bug out much more than most rabbits. And again, that's because they live in some of the harshest conditions with some of the greatest number of predators after them for lagomorph. One of their highest predator species that goes after them would be coyotes. Coyotes are built to hunt jackrabbits. Coyotes are omnivores. They'll hunt a lot of other prey as well. But coyotes are a fission-fusion species, which means, unlike most predators, they have the ability to, and actively do, transition between being a lone hunter or hunting with a temporary pack based off of what nutritional opportunities make themselves available within the coyote's environment. And so, yes, lone coyote will hunt and do its thing and scavenge, going after smaller prey like prairie dogs. But they will, just like those early Native Americans with nets rounding up jackrabbits and those early pioneers rounding up jackrabbits and clubbing them, coyotes will work together in very large temporary packs to corral, scare, startle, and round up jackrabbits and kill them and eat them. So this is always a worry for a jackrabbit. You never know around a corner when all of a sudden, if you hear a howl over here and you start running away from that howl, you could be running into a whole bunch of other coyotes just waiting for you. Badgers are often forgotten, but definitely a predator of jackrabbits. Badgers are diggers, and we normally think of them, I'm a badger in my burrow. But badgers move a lot. I love hunting jackrabbits in the winter with a hawk and getting out there and seeing all the badger tracks that just go on forever. They're just and badgers have an incredible sense of smell. And so when they're running around just looking, and they're so short, and they're actually very quiet when they move, that they'll just come around the corner. Jackrabbits being chased by coyotes usually know it. Jackrabbits being hunted by badgers usually don't know it, and a badger just gets them, comes around the corner, and takes them out. This is a scary way to live. Around every bush, you're a jackrabbit. Around every bush could be a potential mate, a new bunch of grass that you can eat, a potential foe wanting to spar with you over the territory, or a badger or a coyote that wants to eat you. Golden eagles, of all of our North American raptors, are the raptor species that most often predates on jackrabbits. This is why in falconry, golden eagles make such exceptional jackrabbit hunters, because you have a predator-prey relationship from the wild that you're just putting yourself in the middle of. Golden eagle populations often will crash after jackrabbit populations crash. And every time we're out shooting jackrabbits and leaving them, we are having an impact on golden eagles. And that's very sad to me. Usually what they'll do is they'll just choose not to breed. If there are not enough jackrabbits in a set population in an area, a pair will be like, hey, the females won't go into that egg-laying mode because the male's not bringing enough food to show that a family could be supported. So don't invest the effort. And that is a normal cycle of nature. But when we go out and blast a bunch of jackrabbits en masse, that is not part of that cycle. So yeah, you're going to have a bump in prey numbers, a bump in predator numbers, and then crash, up, crash. That is normal. But us coming in and shooting the prey and leaving it with lead poisoning is not normal. In addition to the golden eagles, of course, ferruginous hawks do hunt jackrabbits. Other hawks do too in a limited way, but ferruginous hawks most definitely do hunt jackrabbits with some frequency. And at night, they're every bit as vulnerable because great horned owls also love to hunt jackrabbits. And that's a scary thing. A lot of animals, if they have a nighttime predator, they'll live and do their business in the day, or vice versa. But jackrabbits, it's lose-lose. You've got a daytime shift and a nighttime shift of predators that want to eat you. But again, all of these things have shaped them into something amazing. They have really quite remarkable night vision, and their eyes, of course, allow them to see better than other rabbit species. Their ears are quite unique as well. Most rabbits do have large ears. Jackrabbits' ears are enormous, ridiculous, almost comical. Oversized. And this is more than one thing. Obviously, that helps with hearing. If you're like, you think of the principle of going like this, or like this, suddenly you can hear better. Enormous ears, that helps you pick out a predator. But that's not all it does. Jackrabbits live usually in high deserts that will have extremes of hot and cold. If it's very, very hot, and you're a furry animal, their ears are filled with blood vessels and are very thin, and have very little fur on them, especially on the inside. When they lift them up, it dissipates heat, very similar to an African elephant. Same principle. But those ears flip backwards and fold down, fur on top. Is that funny? Apparently it's funny. But they can keep their ears warm by folding them back down. Max, you're cracking me up. Another very strange thing about jackrabbits is that they don't live underground. They don't dig a burrow or a den. This is strange because you normally think, well, rabbits, when they're scared, they go underground like a prairie dog. Jackrabbits have, over time, evolved in a way that it's not a matter of understanding, it's a matter of selection. But if you are underground, you're trapped. And badgers will dig you out. They will tunnel down in. To a smaller degree, coyotes will too. And this is a threat that cottontails have to face. So jackrabbits are technically always on the move. They don't have a home. They don't have a home base to run to per se. They're always living this dance of like predator, food, mate, danger. You know, they're always on the move, which makes them a very unique species to try to hunt as well. They, of course, have amazing jumping abilities. Their back legs are enormous and have leverage that's unparalleled in the rabbit world. This allows them to jump just for locomotion, but it also allows them to jump above the height of most sagebrush. And why this matters is if you get down at the level of the sage, you find out that it's like a forest for them. It's like trees. It's like being in a forest of juniper trees. They can't see these predators above them. And so they're jump running, and then they'll go doing really high, look around, and go back down in and jump high and look around. Is it getting closer? Are they getting further back? Oh, where do I need to turn? So that ability to jump ridiculously high is actually an advantage. They're also masters with those long legs of sidestepping. Something's chasing you, you can sidestep, but especially with eagles. I've watched wild eagles have this situation with jackrabbits, and I've also had this happen with my trained eagles, where if your eagle is stupid, if it's inexperienced, like a first or second year eagle maybe doesn't know this trick yet, and they're soaring and they're into the wind, and so they're almost in one place, and they see a rabbit out in the open. If the rabbit runs away, the eagle will tuck and dive and will catch them with no problem whatsoever. The rabbit knows this, and so it will turn and watch and wait, and it'll just stop. And if the eagle then dives while the rabbit is not running and watching, at the very last second, they just jump over the eagle. And the look on an eagle's face when they've had a rabbit jump over them is priceless. What? It's crazy. But that's part of their repertoire of ways to survive. One of the most impressive ones. They also, their claws are actually, for a prey species, very formidable. They can kick and they can scratch. And when a hawk or an eagle binds to a jackrabbit, if they don't get the head or neck right off the bat, with mammals, where our nerves are in the back of our neck and where our muscles are and our nerves are, and the greatest bundle of nerves, if you grab the neck, we just do this. We freeze up. We don't think properly. We don't move or react or fight back properly. And so if a jackrabbit is captured in this way, it's over. But if a jackrabbit is grabbed on the back end, even sometimes by a golden eagle, which 1200 PSI, you would think this wouldn't be the case. But if they're grabbed on the back end, surprisingly, they can kick them off. And it's not about the punching power, but just that scratching can be enough to... It can be enough to buck off a hawk or an eagle. Just pretty impressive. So, believe it or not, that's his elephant impression. I've been telling him to do the elephant call. Yeah. Woo! The elephant call. No matter how you look at it, for sure, a jackrabbit is a species that is deserving of our respect. They are, again, from the old pioneer mentality, and for many gun hunters, it's like, oh, it's just shooting targets that happen to be alive. There's so much more than that. And I'm not saying that in some hippie way, some circle of life way. I mean, these are amazing creatures, truly remarkable, And the fact that that predator-prey dance they have with a hawk or an eagle and they themselves has been shaped over eons is something that we should respect and take note of. So as far as their actual biology, they have that live fast, die young way of life. The males are sexually mature at 7 months old. The females, usually it's the beginning of their second year of life, once they just pass the 1 year mark, but they often will breed even their first year. The gestation is 41 to 47 days, and despite wild claims, as far as the studies go, the average litter is only 4 to 5, but they can have several litters a year in some circumstances. Now, this is kind of strange. Remember, they don't have a burrow. So unlike most rabbits and members of the lagomorph family, there's no burrow. The female just does a little bit of a depression in the ground, and her babies are born wide awake with their eyes open, and they're like, "What? Welcome to a brave new world." And she doesn't take care of them, like cuddled with them. She does provide milk, but she's like, "Well, I've given birth. Okay, I'm going to go off and eat. I'm going to come back. Here, have some milk. I'm going to go off." She doesn't look after them or round them up or anything. We don't know for sure how long the weaning takes place because they're so well camouflaged, we don't have good studies of wild jackrabbits. However, in captivity, we have seen that it's about 8 weeks. But that doesn't mean that would replicate the pressures of the wild. So it could be that they wean at 5 or 6 weeks in the wild. But in captivity, our data shows that about 8 weeks is when the babies wean. And after that time, even though mom ditches out, the babies typically stay roughly together for about 1 more week and then disperse out. If you are looking to hunt jackrabbits, and you are hunting in an area that they occur naturally, you have to understand this is a cyclical species. They go in cycles, and you got to be aware of that. They will have bumper years where they explode, and there are jackrabbits everywhere. In those years, where do you look? Anywhere. If you get away from the city, you're going to find them, and they might even be in the city. They're everywhere. What happens is these cyclical years, 1, 2, 3 years, and then they tank, and you're like, where did they go? They just disappear. They're still there, but they're very hard to find. And there's many things that do that. Of course, during bumper years, the predation goes up. Gun hunters are shooting more. There's more car accidents, roadkills. But the biggest thing, really, is disease. Anytime you have a population of any vertebrate that explodes, if any disease that gets entered, it rips through, and then they go down. And this can make them a difficult prey species because if you get a raptor with the intention of hunting jacks, and then you get a crash for 5, 6, 7 years, and you're like, okay, are we ever going to have jackrabbits again? That can make it difficult when you're investing the time in this raptor species. Factor that in, depending on what other prey you may have in your area. But knowing that, let's say it's a normal year, not a bumper year, and you're trying to find them. You have your tall sage, your knee-high sage, and your short sage. Tall sagebrush always has jackrabbits. It always does. But that's because nothing can access it. Predators have a hard time getting through it. Gun hunters, falconers, everybody does. So take a look at this sagebrush. This is, 5, 6, and even 7 feet tall and extremely dense. This is just much, much too tall to hunt in. And here's a few drone shots to give you kind of a better idea of what this is like. Flying over, you can see, imagine being a hawk or an eagle and trying to dive through this. It can be done. In fact, this even patch in this video, I've hunted before with goshawks. And so it's definitely more of an achievement if they can find the right moment to and time things right. But it is difficult. And most hawks and eagles, if they have too much lack of success, they mope. And they're like, there's no point in me expending those calories if I'm never going to have success. And it's tough to get through it. So I recommend just avoiding tall sage altogether of this height. If this height and this density, just forget it. Even if there's rabbits there, unless you got a plan of flushing them out in the open, and a good way to do that, I recommend not doing that. The next is the knee-high or waist-high, the kind of knee-high, waist-high sagebrush. Now, this height is usually perfect. It's not as dense. And this isn't just, it just happens to be that. A lot of this is directly correlated with the water availability. Usually they're getting bigger if there's more water and more nutrition. If there is less water, they're growing knee-high and they're more dispersed because the roots go down and the nutrition they're getting, the root systems are competing for that nutrition. So they're more dispersed. It's a much easier place to hunt. And then the last is the short sage, which literally is only like this tall. On a bumper year, that's heaven to hunt. But if it's not a bumper year, the jackrabbits are smart and they're not competing for resources, and they will gravitate into the knee-high and tall sage areas because there's more cover. You don't want to be in sagebrush this high that's like, 3 feet away every sagebrush if you can avoid it. So again, the short sage is the best, but the knee-high and the waist-high is usually what you are going after. If you're scouting out new areas, there's some things you definitely want to look for to know if this is a productive area. Of course, if it's a good year, you just walk around, and if you see jackrabbits, great, you know they're there. But one of the big things you want to look for is, of course, their poop, their rabbit droppings. If it's old, the area might have been played out, and there's no rabbits grazing and living there anymore. The older poop is usually very tan, sandy colored, or if it's even been a few years, it might even look gray because the solar radiation has just destroyed any pigmentation that was left in that dried up poop, and it's just turning back into dirt, basically. If it's fresh, it's either going to look black or very dark chocolate brown. And it may seem weird talking about poop, but this is nature. And so we're just talking about how do you find these animals. This is a remnant to let you know if this area is grazed or not. Now, trails are another very good indicator. The nature of sagebrush is it's just all random. Rabbits, through their own, trial and error, find which pathways give them the straightest path that they don't have to turn, they can just go straight. In the case of jackrabbits. Now, they'll still go wherever they need to, but if they're trying to run away from you as fast as they can, then they will follow actual preset trails. And if you're watching, you can find these trails, and they're quite noticeable. Much easier, of course, in the winter, where rabbits are going on the same trail a trillion times in the snow, and you can just see it very easily. But even in the dirt, you can see these trails, and they indicate the presence of jackrabbits. Now, jackrabbits also, like most wild mammals, often could have fleas on them, which is unpleasant, and they don't want those on them. And so they regularly take dust baths. And so along the trails, you'll find these little depressions where they've scraped things aside and just given themselves a dust bath to try to clean off and to attempt to get off any parasites that might be on them. So those are three of the biggies: fresh droppings, trails, and dust bath scrapes that they leave along their trails. Now, if you're getting into your open country of sage country, there's different geography and topography in any state you may be hunting jackrabbits. I understand that. And so there's different opportunities. If you're just in the open flats, you're just somewhere in Wyoming and it's just sagebrush forever or something, you can just walk with the bird on your fist. That works. But a lot of people are saying, hey, I want a height advantage, so I'm going to use a T-perch. So a lot of people will fashion an 8-foot tall T-perch and have their hawk right up on top of that T-perch. So the bird has a much higher vantage point, and it's harder for those jackrabbits to sneak away and run off without being noticed. Now, the plus of that is what I just said, but the minus is you can't control what they're going after. So, for example, in virtually every state, jackrabbits are not protected, and cottontail rabbits are and have seasons. So you could have a problem there where if your hawk sees a cottontail and starts going after it and it's out of season, you don't have the ability to hold them and prevent that from happening. So that's one of the minuses of having a T-perch. But otherwise, it is a good way to handle open country. Even better, is if you have a horse or a mule. Not only does that give you a height advantage, but the sound impacts them different. There is nothing on the planet that is bipedal that won't eat you. If you're a rabbit, they know that. They know bipedal, danger. That's a human or something dangerous. But the sound of the four-legged gait of a horse or a mule does not alarm a rabbit. It doesn't spark that, oh, run, in their head. And so if you have access to a horse or a mule, it's a much better way to hunt because you get the height advantage and you also can restrain them from going after a protected species out of season. And you're able to approach much closer without alarming them because of that gait. So, unfortunately, most of us don't have access to a horse or mule anymore. But if you do, it's wonderful. It's a great way to go. Now, trees are good as well. I live in an area where I end up hunting into a lot of juniper trees. So if you're doing that, you can just let your bird fly ahead of you. You're walking along, they fly ahead to a tree, and they turn around, and you are now walking towards them. Any rabbits you scare are now running towards the hawk. They meet them head on. That's a really good way to handle things, is flying tree to tree. It's the same thing with canyons. If you get into some, like I know I've hunted in Arizona a lot, and some of those arroyo canyons are perfect, where they're not giant, and your hawk is flying tree to tree, and then they fly up to the rim of the little canyon and look down at anything you flush. They can take out. Overlooks are good as well. In my state, in Utah, we have a lot of little ridges where it'll come to an edge and drop off in a small cliff. And you just walk to the edge, and they're like, human, and they go running. They are running and putting all the caloric effort, and the hawk just has to drop, and it can make for a fairly easy catch. Along with that, we have a lot of small hills and embankments that you can do the exact same principle. You approach the embankment very quietly, and that embankment or hill makes a visual barrier and an audio barrier so the rabbits don't hear you or see you. And when you go up and over the edge, then anything sees you is startled and instantly tries to run away, and your hawk is already diving and already ready to go. The dry washes work very well as well. Remember, sagebrush doesn't like it totally arid. It likes to get some moisture and grows accordingly. So dry washes are wonderful. Dry washes usually are surrounded on the sides by just dry sagebrush-free zones, but down in the dry wash from rainstorms, there's enough water that gets collected down there to have sagebrush, so the rabbits feel safe. So if you walk along the edge with your bird and you have some people down in the wash that take a stick and hit the brush to flush out the rabbits, then there you go. That can work really quite well. But remember, jackrabbits are smart. They're thinkers. They're not just reactionary animals alone. They are incredibly smart and have been shaped by all different predators and pressures from nature. And so you have to respect that. I can't tell you how many falconers I've seen this happen to, myself included, where you've got your bird and you're like, all right, and you're hitting the brush and you walk past and then somebody else turns around, hey, and there's a rabbit that you walked right past and it just held still. And as soon as you walk past, they sneak and slink away. They're very smart animals. And again, that's why I think that for falconry, they're such amazing quarry to pursue. If you catch a rabbit, then what do? You caught yourself a jackrabbit. What is to be done? Well, there's different answers as far as the procedures on the kill, of course. Everybody's got a different thing. Some people trade off instantly. Some people let their bird crop up on the kill. I'll tell you what I recommend and why. I get in there fairly quickly, and I take my pre-weighed meal, some other meal, put it to the side, or maybe that on a lure, and have the bird jump off the jackrabbit and then eat all of this. Let them have their fill. Meanwhile, you turn around, take the jackrabbit. I put on rubber gloves. I didn't used to do this, but I highly recommend it. And very quickly, you need to do two things. You need to eviscerate and gut the rabbit, get rid of the insides, and put them elsewhere. And remember, as you're putting them elsewhere, your bird may finish what they're eating and go after those. If you want to let your bird eat them, fine, but usually that lower intestine you kind of want your bird to avoid. So I usually take that, leave that out for the predators, for nutrition to circle back into the environment. but also skin them quickly. This is very easy. Jackrabbit skin is very soft, almost paper thin, as opposed to domestic rabbits. It's total opposite. And that skin peels off very quickly and easily. You want to get that off, not in any fancy way, but because remember, most jackrabbits have fleas. And as soon as the temperature comes down, the fleas feel, wait, our host is dying, jump onto the next warmest thing, which is either you or your bird. You don't want that. So I'll quickly take it off, take out the viscera, and peel the skin and fold it in on itself. And typically, unless I have plans for it, I don't keep the skin. And I'll bury that in the ground so that those fleas don't get passed on to any other predator that might come along and eat them. So for me, it's one simple process. It's like, okay, trade off. Okay, now quickly take these out, put them over here, take this out, scrape, put over, bury, and then put that carcass behind me. When you have it, though, what are you going to do with it? A lot of people will use it for their birds for later on, and that's fine. It's, I don't know why. This is my personal experience, and if you've had a different experience, I respect that. But I have found the Utah jackrabbits that I have hunted do not offer a very rich nutritional value for an eagle's digestive system. Meaning when I've tried to maintain golden eagles off of jackrabbit diets, which is part of their natural diet, they burn through it. I don't know why they don't process it as well. Harris hawks, goshawks, red-tailed hawks, they seem to get more nutritional value out of it than golden eagles. And again, if you've had a different experience, feel free to write it in the comments. I'm just sharing what I've experienced. But I eat jackrabbits. I don't eat them all, but I eat them. Down the back, there are the loin muscles that go down there. They're very good, and that's usually what I eat. I'll also eat the back legs. I'll cut them in strips to get the tendons out, and I'll go from the kneecap to the pelvis, and I'll cut that up. And if it's gamey, if I'm in a real tough area where they're not eating a lot of grasses, they're eating more sagebrush and dry, nasty, like bunch grasses, then I'll marinate them. Otherwise, I just cook them up, and they're very good to eat. Now, they're not as soft as cottontails, but then cook them accordingly. Cook them you can boil them. You can cook them in a stir fry. But those two muscle groups, the tenderloin muscles and the upper muscles on the back legs, I quite enjoy. And the rest of it, I'll take game shears and cut up the bone in the meat and into tiny little pieces. Not the meat, I cut the bone into tiny little pieces in the meat, cut that into sections, and put it in the freezer to feed birds during the molt. And so it's a win-win. You got some meat. There's meat for your birds. The fleas have been buried and are not going to bother some other predator. The intestines and organs are out there for the predators and to work their way back into the system. So it's a very challenging game species. So overall, it's a natural experience for both predator and prey. Sometimes the prey wins, sometimes the predator wins, and you get some meat and a wonderful wildlife experience out of the whole thing. So that's a bit longer. This is my first attempt at doing a prey species video. I hope you learned a few things. Again, every region's different. I'm sharing mostly my experience hunting in Utah and also some hunting in Arizona and Idaho. If you have more questions about hunting jackrabbits or about their biology, feel free to ask in the questions or share your stories down below. Let me know what other videos you would like me to make. And please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And as always, happy hawking.